What if the people signing the peace deal don't actually control the war? What if, right now, somewhere in Tehran, a handshake means absolutely nothing? Before we go any further, do me a favor. Tap that like button right now, not because I asked nicely, but because this story is about to get stranger with every passing minute, and you'll want proof later that you saw it coming. Hit subscribe too, and drop a comment telling me one word that describes how you feel about Iran right now. Let's begin. For 7 days, the world watched something that looked like hope. Iranian diplomats sat across the table from Omani officials, and every single day, a new update came out of Tehran. Progress, they said. Coordinates agreed. A joint statement almost ready. Officials speaking in calm, careful language, the kind of language governments use when they want the world to relax. Markets started paying attention. Analysts began drafting predictions about a reopened Strait of Hormuz. Shipping companies quietly began adjusting their schedules, hoping the worst was finally behind them. It felt, for a moment, like one of the most dangerous waterways on Earth was about to breathe again after months of holding its breath. Then, in less than a day, all of it came apart. A spokesman for Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps stepped forward and said something that stopped everyone in their tracks. He didn't hint at disagreement. He didn't soften his words. He said plainly that whatever happens in the Strait of Hormuz has nothing to do with the deal being worked out with Oman. Nothing at all. In one sentence, a branch of Iran's own military told the world that the diplomats sitting in that room don't speak for the water, the ships, or the guns stationed along that coastline. Sit with that for a second. This wasn't a rival country contradicting Iran. This wasn't an enemy trying to sabotage the talks from outside. This was Iran contradicting Iran. Two arms of the same government, standing in the same building, answering to the same flag, telling two completely different stories to the entire planet. One side was shaking hands. The other side was loading weapons. Both of them claimed to speak for the same nation. So which one is real? Is the war ending, like the diplomats claim, or is it just getting started, like the military insists? To understand how this happened, we need to look at how power actually works inside Iran, because it isn't as simple as one government making one decision and everyone else falling in line. Iran's diplomats have real authority. They can travel, negotiate, and put their names on official documents. They can smile for cameras and issue statements that get picked up by every major news outlet within minutes. But signing a paper and controlling a coastline are two very different things. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps doesn't answer to the foreign ministry. It has its own leadership structure, its own navy, its own budget, and its own chain of command that reports somewhere else entirely, closer to the very top of Iran's religious and military establishment. It was built to protect the revolution itself, not to follow instructions from career. Diplomats in suits sitting across a table in a foreign country. This isn't the first time this exact pattern has shown up either. There was a moment before, not long ago, when a deal was reached in Tehran, celebrated publicly, treated as a genuine turning point after months of tension. Reporters called it historic. Officials called it a breakthrough. And then, almost as if on cue, the Guard acted like the agreement never existed in the first place. Drones were launched at commercial ships not long after the ink had dried on that supposed breakthrough. History has a strange way of repeating itself when the same structural problem never actually gets solved underneath the surface. So here we are again, watching the same pattern play out in real time. Diplomats saying the crisis is nearly over. The military saying the diplomats never had the authority to end anything in the first place. And that leaves us with a question that matters far beyond Iran's own borders. If the Guard doesn't recognize this deal, then who exactly has Oman been negotiating? With all this time, who is the deal actually binding? Because right now, it looks like nobody who's actually holding a weapon on that water. Think about what that means for every country watching from the outside. The United States, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia. Every shipping company that relies on this strait to move oil and cargo around the world. They've all been watching these talks, hoping for a resolution. But if the group with actual control over the water isn't even part of the conversation, then what exactly were these 7 days of negotiation actually worth? Were they real progress, or were they theater? Performed for an audience that desperately wanted to believe peace was close? That question becomes even more urgent when you look at what's been happening out on the water itself, because the numbers tell a story that no press release can spin away, no matter how carefully worded it is. On July 14th, the blockade around the Strait of Hormuz returned in full force. Since that day, the United States Central Command has been tracking every single vessel attempting to cross this narrow stretch of water, one of the most vital shipping routes on the entire planet. The results are almost hard to believe once you actually sit with them. 51 commercial ships have been forced to turn back. 51. Not delayed for a few hours, not rerouted around a minor obstacle, turned around completely, forced to abandon their journey and find another path, if one even existed. 2 vessels were disabled outright, left stranded and helpless in open water. 2 more were boarded by force, stopped in the middle of the sea by armed personnel who climbed aboard uninvited. And here's the number that says everything you need to know about who's really in charge right now, more than any statement or press conference ever could. 0. 0 ships made it through successfully during this entire period. Not one. Every single attempt to pass ended the same way, again and again, without a single exception. If diplomacy were actually steering events here, you would expect at least some cracks in that number, if one even existed. You'd expect a few ships slipping through disabled outright, some small stranded and helpless in open water outcomes on the ground. 2, even it's hard to believe once you actually sit with them. Instead, the wall 51 commercial ships without a single gap to turn back for weeks on 51. Not it isn't just ships being turned away peacefully, not rerouted around a minor obstacle, they came with nothing worse turned around completely, forced to abandon their journey, and the violence is escalating in a way that existed. Should worry everyone. 2 vessels were disabled outright. Just this morning, stranded and helpless struck an Emirati tanker in that same stretch of water. A direct hit on a civilian vessel simply trying to complete its journey. This wasn't an isolated event either. Since February, 15 tankers belonging to the United Arab Emirates have been hit. 15. Not warnings fired into the air, not near misses meant to send a message. Direct strikes, again and again, forming a pattern too consistent, too deliberate to ever be called accidental. The UAE government has started calling these attacks by a very specific name. Not warfare, not defense, piracy. When a government chooses that particular word, it's telling you exactly how it views what's happening to its ships and its people. It's a word that strips away any pretense of this being a legitimate military operation. It frames these attacks as lawless, as criminal, as something the entire world should be alarmed by, rather than something diplomats can quietly negotiate away over tea in a conference room. On top of all this, Iran has now floated the idea of placing mines inside the strait. Mines don't target one ship at a time the way a missile does. They sit beneath the surface, patient and invisible, and threaten everything that passes over them for as long as they remain hidden. It's one of the most dangerous escalations available in modern naval conflict because it turns an entire waterway into a gamble for every single vessel that dares to enter it, whether that vessel belongs to a hostile nation or a completely neutral one just trying to deliver goods. So ask yourself this. If a peace deal was really this close to being finalized, why didn't any of this slow down even slightly? Why did ships keep getting turned back at exactly the same rate throughout the entire negotiation period? Why did tankers keep getting hit while diplomats were smiling for cameras in Oman, shaking hands and talking about frameworks and coordinates? The IRGC's statement suddenly makes a lot more sense once you line it up against these numbers. They weren't bluffing when they said the deal meant nothing to them. They were simply describing reality as it already existed on the water. The people holding weapons out there never stopped acting like they owned that strait, because as far as they're concerned, they always have. Let's pause here for a second, because I want to ask you something directly. If you were a ship captain right now, heading toward that strait with a full cargo and a crew depending on you, who would you actually be worried about? The diplomats sitting comfortably in Oman, or the commanders standing on patrol boats with weapons in their hands, watching your every move through binoculars? Type your answer in the comments below. I read every single one, and I genuinely want to know what you think, because your perspective helps shape where we take this channel next. And if this video has already taught you something you didn't know 2 minutes ago, something that changes how you understand this crisis, share it with someone who needs to see it too. Now, if the guard is the one actually deciding what happens on that water, a bigger question follows naturally, one that goes beyond just ships and missiles and statements. What is stopping this entire situation from spiraling into a full-blown regional war? What is keeping the ships that do manage to move it all safe from becoming the next headline? The answer isn't sitting in a courtroom or a negotiating room in Oman. It's flying quietly, thousands of feet above the strait, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and most people watching this crisis unfold have never even heard its name. It's called the KC-135 Stratotanker. This aircraft first took flight back in 1956, nearly 70 years ago, during a completely different era of history, built for threats that never fully materialized the way people once feared they would. And yet, decades later, this same aging aircraft has quietly become the backbone of the entire American presence over the Persian Gulf, holding together an operation far more complex than most people realize. Here's why it matters so much. A fighter jet, on its own, can only stay airborne for around 90 minutes before it needs to turn back and refuel. 90 minutes sounds like plenty of time until you realize how long tensions can simmer in a standoff like this one, where threats can appear on radar with almost no warning at all. But with a KC-135 refueling jets mid-air, fighters can remain over the Gulf almost continuously, watching, waiting, ready to respond the moment something happens below them. That single capability changes the entire nature of this blockade. Staying in the sky isn't a bonus feature here. It's the whole strategy, the quiet foundation that everything else depends on. Now picture what's actually happening up there, because it isn't just one layer of defense, it's three, stacked carefully on top of each other, each one doing something the others simply cannot. The first layer belongs to the F-35 Lightning. Think of it as the eyes of the entire operation, constantly scanning, constantly watching. Its sensors give it a full circle of awareness around itself, spotting small boats, tracking wakes across the water, and noticing unusual movement near ports, long before anyone on the ground would ever catch it. And whatever it sees, it doesn't keep to itself. That information gets shared instantly across the entire operation, giving every pilot, every commander, every decision maker the exact same picture in real time, no matter where they are. The second layer belongs to the F-16 Viper. Central Command keeps sending these aircraft back into rotation again and again, day after day. And they're carrying something specifically designed for this exact kind of fight. Laser-guided rocket systems built to intercept drones before they ever reach their targets. What makes this so effective is how the technology has quietly evolved over the years. Once a pilot locks onto a target with a laser, they no longer have to hold that lock steady themselves the entire time. Artificial intelligence takes over the tracking automatically, freeing the pilot to immediately shift their attention toward the next incoming threat. And that speed matters enormously here, because Iran rarely sends a single drone at a time. It tends to send several at once, hoping that even if most are stopped, one manages to slip through the gaps. A jet that can juggle multiple targets in seconds becomes one of the most valuable tools in this entire standoff. Then there's a third layer, one that hasn't fully entered the fight yet, but could reshape everything the moment it does. It's called the X-1, built by a company known as Shield AI. This aircraft can launch straight upward without needing a runway at all, which means there's no fixed base for an enemy to target and disable in a surprise strike. It operates almost entirely through its own onboard decision-making software, capable of flying more than 2,000 nautical miles without relying on GPS or outside communication to function correctly. And according to the company's own figures, you could field 10 to 20 of these aircraft for roughly the cost of a single next-generation bomber. If this technology becomes fully active in the region, it wouldn't just quietly support the existing blockade. It could completely change how the entire standoff gets managed from this point forward. Put all three of these pieces together, and a much clearer picture starts to form in front of you. Tankers keeping fighters in the sky far longer than they could ever manage on their own. Fighters watching every single inch of water below with near total awareness of everything moving beneath them. And a new generation of drone technology waiting quietly in reserve, ready to be deployed the moment the situation demands something more. All of this working around the clock without pause to hold a blockade that Iran's own military insists has absolutely nothing to do with any deal made in Oman. And that brings us to the real question hiding underneath all of this. If the United States has assembled this much air power, this much technology, this many layers of defense, just to maintain a holding pattern over one stretch of water, how long can a standoff like this actually last before something bigger becomes unavoidable? How long can two sides stare at each other across a waterway before someone, somewhere, makes a mistake? That can't be taken back? Before we get to where this leaves us, I want to try something a little different. If you've made it this far into the video, you already care about understanding this conflict on a real level, not just skimming the headlines and moving on with your day. So here's your challenge. Comment the words "still watching right now," and let's see how many of you are genuinely locked into this story with me from start to finish. It helps this video reach more people who need to understand what's actually happening here, and honestly, it means a lot to see how many of you stick around till the very end. So where does all of this actually leave us? For months, plenty of people treated the Strait of Hormuz like a problem waiting for the right paperwork to fix it. Something that enough meetings and enough patient diplomacy could eventually resolve, given enough time and enough goodwill on both sides. But everything we've just walked through tells a very different story, one that's far harder to accept, but far more honest. This waterway isn't being managed from a conference room in Oman. It's being managed by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and that fact is now sitting out in the open for the entire world to see, whether anyone is comfortable with it or not. The Guard has made its position unmistakably clear, and it hasn't left much room for interpretation. Even if Iran's diplomats sign a complete, formal agreement with Oman, the Guard has already said that agreement won't determine what happens on the water. It still decides who passes and who doesn't. In practical terms, that means it can keep collecting whatever advantage it wants from that strait, keep deciding which ships move freely and which ones get turned back, boarded, or struck without warning. This tells us something important, and honestly something a little unsettling, about the state of power inside Iran itself right now. The people negotiating in Oman and the people commanding ships on the water are not speaking with one voice anymore. On this issue, at least, they appear to be operating almost independently of each other, following two separate agendas under one flag. And that creates a serious problem for anyone hoping diplomacy alone can fix this crisis. If the diplomats in Tehran don't actually speak for the group holding the weapons, then what exactly does an agreement with them accomplish in the real world? A deal signed under these conditions risks becoming little more than a piece of paper, however carefully worded, however celebrated in the moment. It might get praised in headlines for a day or two. It might even briefly calm nervous markets and reassure worried shipping companies. But if the Guard doesn't consider itself bound by it, nothing actually changes out on the water where it matters most, where ships are still being turned away and tankers are still being hit. Global markets already seem to understand this better than most news coverage does. Oil prices haven't spiked the way you'd expect during a crisis this intense and this prolonged, but they also haven't dropped the way they would if traders genuinely believed peace was close and lasting. That in itself tells you something important. Investors aren't pricing in a quick resolution to any of this. They're pricing in a blockade that continues for a long stretch of time, one where the American military keeps stepping in again and again just to keep ships moving at all, patching the situation together day by day, rather than solving it once and for all. That's not the market reacting to a war ending. That's the market quietly bracing for one that simply doesn't stop. This creates a strange, uneasy new normal for the entire region, one that could last far longer than anyone initially expected. A blockade that gets tested constantly, day after day, week after week. A military presence that has to stay switched on every single hour, with no real end date in sight, and no clear off-ramp visible on the horizon. And diplomats whose signatures might not carry anywhere near the weight the world assumed they did just a few weeks ago, before all of this contradiction came out into the open. So the real question moving forward isn't really about Oman at all, not anymore. It's about who actually holds power inside Iran when it comes down to it. Is it the government sitting behind closed doors, writing careful statements and shaking hands for cameras, hoping the world takes their word for it? Or is it the commanders standing on ships, making split-second decisions about who gets through and who doesn't, answering to no one but their own chain of command? Right now, almost every piece of evidence we've walked through points toward the same uncomfortable answer. The Guard isn't just one part of this story anymore. The Guard has become the entire story, and everyone else, diplomats included, may simply be playing a supporting role in it. And until that changes, until there's real clarity about who actually speaks for Iran when it comes to this strait, any deal signed anywhere else in the world may end up meaning very little to the people actually standing on that water, watching, waiting, and deciding, ship by ship, who gets to pass and who doesn't. This is a story that's still unfolding in real time, and the next 24 hours could flip everything we just talked about on its head, exactly like it did before. If you want to understand what happens next before most people even hear about it on the news, make sure you're subscribed, because we'll be here breaking it down the moment it happens, piece by piece, just like we did today. And if you're still with me right now, all the way to this final line, drop a comment and let me know, who do you think is really in control of the Strait of Hormuz? I'll see you in the next one.